Hey, it's Jordan with TYT and TYT Politics here in my lavish hotel room in North Dakota. And right now I am focused on my line of work because it's been under attack for a while. Under this president, forget it. If we'll all be in the guillotine sooner or later. And I'm here with a fellow journalist who was arrested, I think around 2 weeks ago during the last child's camp raid. I actually just by bad chance wasn't there that day. I was in South Dakota covering something, but luckily we got footage. You've been here on and off since September, Janet Monet. Jenny Monet. And what I want you to tell your story, but I just want to say this isn't the first journalist that they've been intimidating, arresting. Amy Goodman, other journalists, including me, they've tried to intimidate. They've shot at journalists, rubber bullets, other things. So this has been a continual problem. So that day, tell us what you were doing, what you were covering, and how it came about that you were arrested.
First of all, thank you for just highlighting this issue. I think that we can't talk enough about the pattern of these kind of just wayward treatment that we're experiencing as storytellers, as people who are credentialed media there to do a job, just like police are there to do a job. And, being arrested, especially at this time, at this very critical moment of this battle that I've been reporting on for nearly 6 months, it has been a huge distraction. It's been just a trying time to juggle and, shine a light on my own legal defense, but also jockeying for just doing my job, informing the public, because that's what we do as journalists, right? I mean, that's why it's protected by the First Amendment, is because an informed public is a better public, not just here in North Dakota, but for democracy in general. So that was what I was doing the day that I was covering the First Nation camp demonstration that turned into, if you want to call it a raid. I feel like I have maintained strong working relationships at the county and state level, and was prepared to write a very fair assessment of that operation, because it was the first time where I did not see use of chemical sprays or rubber-coated bullets.
So you were saying the day of the last child, I call it a raid, whatever you want to call it. You were there covering it, and for the first time, you had seen that they weren't using rubber bullets or chemical weapons.
And I find that, just putting that kind of situation in context, because at the time, the days leading up to that incident, there had been all of this kind of very positive, forward conversation happening at the state and tribal level. The governor of North Dakota, Doug Burgum, was making routine visits to the reservation along with members of his staff. He was meeting with camp and tribal leaders in late night conversations in Bismarck. I mean, this is unprecedented. We hadn't seen anything like this under the previous governor, Jack Dalrymple. And so this kind of message of the new governor coming in and trying to mend fences and these, kind of strained relations was really packing home a message. And I think it was felt when police said, to Chase Iron Eyes and the people that are believed to be behind setting up the last child camp, was that you guys basically, put everybody back, at that time, which to each his own, anyone could convey that. But there was this climate, and up there on that bluff that day, I was absorbing that experience as someone who has been following this story, someone who understood the context and being able to walk away and report on it. That's why our job matters. It's not that this was just another protest on police confrontation. There's actually substance there, and to bring that kind of substance, and yet it gets clouded by arresting journalists who are trying to shine a light on the narrative of the story. So I just find that that's pretty poignant in what my own personal struggle is in all of this.
Can you explain for the audience just the sequence? You were there. 75, 76 other people were arrested. Did they tell you to leave and you wouldn't leave? Did they challenge your credentials? How did you get arrested?
So I think that once it was 76 people were reportedly arrested, and then that number, by the time I was released from my 40 hours of detention, dwindled down to 74 somehow. But I walked up there with Chase Iron Eyes that afternoon and interviewed him as we were walking up, and really getting a sense of why he was doing what he was doing. And I was able to capture some very verite moments among what was happening among the resistance water protectors who were, kind of mulling over what their side of the negotiation message would be to police. And it was very interesting to hear and to be present during that moment and to hear what was going on in their minds. And of course, I was also there when the police started moving in. There was a couple of exchanges between one of the former camp organizers who'd been here throughout the movement, who was the kind of mediator between the Last Child Camp resistors and the police. So I was there gathering interviews, taking notes, photographs, all traits of my job that are no different than what I'd been doing over the many months that I've been reporting here at Standing Rock. And when the police approached and were clearly, in a standoff with the water protectors, Lieutenant Tim Iverson, who I know from many press conferences that I have been at and, have had nice and healthy dialogue with in those kind of forums, had asked me for my press pass, and I carry them on my phone. I don't have badge after badge. I'd be walking around with them all the time. I don't do that. I carry them on my phone. And it's gotten me into press conferences with the governor. My press passes on my phone have gotten me into press events with Morton County. They're valid forms that have been accepted repeatedly. And I showed one of my press passes on my phone with Yes Magazine, a publication that I work for. And he said, okay, let's go over here. But interestingly enough, there were two people with video cameras, who weren't able to produce press credentials, and they were sent down the hill, able to go without arrest. So they had a chance to leave. I had my press pass. I was asked to stand behind the teepees. Not only did I stand behind the teepees and police line because I didn't have protective gear on, I felt like I overcompensated and went beyond the line and in purview where I could still see the action, but still not feel like I was going to be in any harm's way, because as we know, there's a history of violence on the hands of police in these confrontations. I didn't have a helmet. I didn't have protective eyewear. I was worried about my safety, but I also wanted to see what this kind of confrontation was going to play out, how it was going to play out. And I must have been standing several feet away for maybe 20 minutes, however long it took for police to break the locked arms circle around the fire. And I might have moved in, or I moved in every now and then for a photo, but I was respectful and stayed back. And a police officer came over to me and he said, walk or you're going to get arrested. And I just turned around. There was no argument. There was no confrontation. I didn't even tell him I was a journalist. I just walked away. And to be clear, I was not even thinking that I was under any real position to get arrested. I was walking away thinking about my writing deadlines and whether or not the governor was still going to come to Cannonball that night as was scheduled because of this police operation. And so
I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure I understand. So when he told you, walk or you're going to get arrested, I'm assuming they weren't like politely handing water protectors flowers saying, please leave. I'm assuming it was at that point escalating and they were being rough.
Yeah, I mean, rough to the degree that we've seen in the past, no. This was perhaps the most peaceful exchange of mass arrests that I've seen, and I've been at many of these demonstrations. Do I want to say that they were nice? No, but they brought people to their knees. They flex cuffed them behind their back. There wasn't a water protector there that was able to walk away like I was. It was a very clear distinction that I was not with the water protectors that I was there as a journalist doing my job. When I was given the orders to leave, I left, and I was surprised when I was approached halfway down the hill by another officer, a second officer, sitting in a parked vehicle at the edge of this ridge, and he got out and he said, you need to stop, we're placing you under arrest. And the officer who had previously asked me to leave was following right behind me. So he had every intent, even though he asked me to leave, he apparently had intentions to arrest me anyway. So, I implied...
Kind of set you up, it seems.
Well, I'm not even really sure. I've told the North Dakota media that I think it's a big misunderstanding. I would like to think that because, as I've said, I've made concerted efforts to form really positive working relationships at the county and the state level with the local ranching community, with members of the oil and gas industry and the proponents, just to get fair coverage of this story from across all sides. One of my first stories that I produced out of this movement on the ground here involved an interview with the president of the North Dakota Petroleum Council. I think it's because I think I'm Native American and I often write about indigenous issues that I think I overdo that so that my work isn't seen as biased in any way. And so I just felt really just kind of like slighted in a sense that the minute they knew I was a journalist, they should have just let me go. And they haven't. And I still maintain that. And I still feel very adamant that my charges should be dropped.
And what are the charges?
Criminal trespassing and engaging in a riot, both Class B misdemeanors.
So Class B misdemeanors, would that be any jail time?
30 days in jail each and $500 fine.
But with legislation that's currently in the process that might go through, it could be moved up, you said.
With the legislation that's being proposed at the North Dakota State Capitol right now, for instance, on the issue of rioting, would increase the penalty by 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine. Fortunately, in my case, it's not retroactive, so I face just the penalties that exist right now. But the minute that legislation gets approved, any one of these water protectors that it is charged with and engaging in a riot or criminal trespassing will now face stricter penalties if those, what they're called DAPL bills, are approved.
So I'm going to turn to the audience for a second. She is a lot less kind. She's more kind than I am. So I'm going to say what's really going on here because, in fairness, I think I respect that you try to appear, open and non-biased to, folks on the other side. I don't really worry about that because, the Young Turks, we're very aggressive. Yes. And they don't want to talk to us.
But we're grateful for that too. That's needed. There are all kinds of stripes of journalism today. And I think that's why this matters so much, for all of us to be talking and all of us to stand up together and say, just because, let's say, Sarah LaFleur Vetter, another journalist in this movement, has gotten arrested, she produces really artful and impactful videos that might carry an advocacy slant, but is that any less of her being a journalist for a credible source like Al Jazeera? No.
Right. Well, why I said that is I don't think it was a misunderstanding. Just to be honest, I think they are trying to do just with normal water protectors, by them dropping the hammer, in many cases concocting charges out of thin air, which I've seen myself, tear gas, rubber bullets, all of this. This is a very explicit attempt to intimidate, to instill fear, and basically prevent people from protesting, demonstrating, more people from coming back to camp, because the police knows that there's calls for more people to come. In the case of journalists, honestly, we're going to talk about this later. There's relatively few journalists on the ground. A lot of great documentary filmmakers and independent, but large-scale, high-profile outlets, not many. So I think the police know that. And when they do see journalists, especially anyone that's currently live on Facebook, they want to suppress those people. They want to instill fear in other journalists because, frankly, some journalists are very aggressive and will, not worried about anything, and some will kind of, you know, take their marching orders from the police and go the other way. So I think when you showed him your credentials and they said, okay, walk away, and then you see him following you, it seems like it was kind of, you know, they had pretty much set off on arresting you.
I've been so busy, I haven't even obtained my own police report yet, but I tend to believe that the arresting officer was out of county or not with the North Dakota State Patrol or Morton County or even Bismarck Police. I don't have that confirmed, but I've been around these front lines long enough to know that certain officers from the outside act a certain way. So I think that that's what I mean by there's a misunderstanding. But I also, I would like to just give the benefit of the doubt to the North Dakota State Patrol and Lieutenant Iverson when he denied that to Bismarck Tribune that I ever even showed my press pass. And that was quoted by Carolyn Gruskin from the Tribune, who I felt did a very fair report and assessment of my arrest. But also what I was grateful for about her story was that she was able to get at truth that I was not able to, because I'm essentially having to report on myself. And so I would like to give the benefit of the doubt. I think you're right. I'm probably more polite than a lot more people out here. Again, I think that just comes from trying to maintain these respectful ties out here.
Well, like you said, being a Native American journalist, you almost have to overcompensate with these folks.
I really believe that. I mean, I think I've written about that actually in the aftermath of my arrest. Is that, you know, it's definitely overkill on making sure that there is no ruffled feathers. But I will not hide the truth. I mean, I don't want that to mean that I'm not going to make sure that the public knows that here's my audio that shows that Lieutenant Iverson may have misremembered the steps, and my piece on my my detainment in Morton County Correctional Center is coming out tomorrow, and some of the facts behind what I experienced with the other women is alarming.